It is my pleasure at this point to introduce Salli Pung as the next presenter. Ms. Pung is the Michigan State Long Term Care Ombudsman, and Ms. Pung will be presenting on the Ombudsman program. The floor is yours, Ms. Pung.
Thank you, Kristen. I'm so happy to be here today to take just a few minutes to share with you information about the work that our program does on abuse prevention and our specific program requirements related to abuse, neglect, and exploitation. As a quick reminder, Toy had mentioned that we represent residents in nursing homes, adult foster care homes, and homes for the aged. So let's start with our program requirements. So as Cynthia just mentioned, long-term care ombudsmen are not mandatory reporters, and we are excluded from mandatory reporting requirements under our state law. We are required to obtain consent in order to report any allegations of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. So the resident has to drive us, if you will, or give us consent in order for us to make a report. I just wanted to share this with you today, as many people do not know this important detail about our program. So I wanted to share a little bit about how we do respond. So when an ombudsman is notified of an allegation of abuse, neglect, or exploitation, we first remind the person that's notifying us or making that report of the options for reporting abuse, neglect, or exploitation, like calling APS or calling local law enforcement, or reporting it to the long-term care provider. We want to make sure they're aware of the options that are available. Then our next step is to very carefully approach the resident to discuss the allegations of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. We understand that it may be an embarrassing and traumatic time for the resident, so we take extra care to follow the resident's lead and only to discuss that allegation if the resident is comfortable in doing so. So if an ombudsman witnesses or we observe abuse, neglect, or exploitation, again, we would privately discuss the situation with the resident to first determine how the resident is doing, if they have someone we can contact for them, like a friend or a family member, and if they want our assistance in filing a complaint about the abuse, neglect, or exploitation. With consent from the resident, we would remind the staff who may have witnessed the abuse, neglect, or exploitation of their reporting requirements. Again, you can see how we're driven by the residents. As advocates, we offer support to the resident during this really difficult time. So when the resident does want our help, we work with the resident to develop a plan to investigate and resolve the concern. It's important for ombudsmen to ask the resident what resolution they are seeking, as it may not involve confronting the perpetrator or reporting the allegation. The resident could want to move to another another room, to another unit, or even to another home. They may not want to engage with certain visitors or staff members, or they may want to seek support from the social worker or other external resources. And this could change over time. So we always continue to touch base with that resident in case they get to the point that they're comfortable in reporting. The resolution could be about the resident moving on and healing rather than prosecution of the alleged perpetrator. We also discuss the options to report the allegation to the provider, to local law enforcement, APS, and the state survey agency, as those are the options that would be available to the resident. So when a resident doesn't want our help, we are very limited in what we can do as ombudsmen. We remind the resident that we are available should they want our help in the future. And we may also suggest to the provider that the training on abuse, neglect, or exploitation may be needed, and we would offer to provide that training to their staff. I just wanted to speak quickly today about when a guardian or a legal representative is the alleged perpetrator. So in those situations, the ombudsman, again, always starts with the resident to determine if and how the resident wants us to proceed. The ombudsman is not required to include the guardian or legal representative in the investigation due to our federal regulations that allow us to investigate under these circumstances without that consent. So if the resident is unable to consent to the investigation, our federal ombudsman regulations also allow the state ombudsman, that's me, to authorize a local ombudsman to investigate a case if the resident is at risk of harm and there's no reason to believe that the resident would object to the investigation. So we're really grateful to have this safety net in our regulations to ensure that residents who are unable to consent or residents who have a legal representative who are the alleged perpetrator can receive advocacy services for these really difficult situations. So I wanted to share with you today a few resources that are available through our program. So in an effort to prevent abuse, neglect, and exploitation, our program developed an interactive in-person training for long-term care staff that focuses on prevention. This training is available free of charge to long-term care providers. So we're also in the process of developing an abuse prevention training for residents to help them identify abuse, neglect, and exploitation and offer them tips for self-advocacy or tips that they can use in preventing abuse if they see that something's escalating in the home. So we believe that the best approach to abuse prevention is to train everyone that's involved. So for providers on the call today, you can reach out to my office at 517-827-8040 and you can discuss your training needs. We have a few staff members available and a few of our local ombudsmen who would be more than happy to come and offer an abuse prevention training in your facility. And as a reminder, you can visit our website at www.mltcop.org. For contact information, you can locate your local ombudsman in a drop-down box, and there are lots of other resources, including fact sheets on several long-term care topics. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for your time today and see if there are any questions I could answer.
Well, Salli, I think you must have done a fabulous job because I don't see any questions. Scott Alfeld, am I missing any questions?
I'm looking at one about if the resident does not want to proceed, can the ombudsman refer the provider to Laura for investigation? Is that something that's possible?
So Scott, if the resident does not give the ombudsman consent, we are not able to release the resident's name to the provider. And that's why we've trained our ombudsman that in those circumstances, it's often helpful to say to the provider, there might be a need to do abuse prevention training here at the facility. Since we are restricted, we can't release that resident name. It would be very difficult to refer them to Lara without having the details or the specific resident identified in that complaint.
The rest look like just comments that I'm seeing, Catherine.
All right, I think we turn it back over to Kristen.
All right, thank you, Ms. Pung. We really appreciate your explanation of the limits of exactly what ombudsman can and cannot do for vulnerable adults.